I put this up on the shelf and really read it, because I get so much, and I think, well, I'll read that later. And by chance, there was several of these, and there was one at the house. It was on top of the entertainment system. So I thought, I'll sit there and read this. And so I read it, and I'm really glad I did, because in these section of World Bible School has been around for years, and Sunset Church of Christ and the Sunset International Bible College has certainly been a good part of that. Tex Williams is the past president, director of the World Bible School. But in this particular Action, they call it Action Magazine, talks about 3 individuals. And I just thought these stories were so inspiring for me, and redefine, or at least redevelop in my mind what Christianity is all about and where we need to get back to. Because when I saw the indomitable courage that these young men had and have today, and what's developed in their life, it just really should inspire you to want to get into missions and to reach out and to save others. Because if you're not reaching out, you're just not happy as a Christian. I don't care what you tell me. If you're not making a difference in somebody's life, then you really are not happy. You can't be. Because you're not, in essence, living what God wanted us to. We know in Matthew 28 that as he was ready to leave the apostles, he told them to go into all the world and preach the gospel. And, of course, make disciples. I think one thing that we've left out is we're not making disciples. And you can't convince somebody who's not a disciple to get on fire for God. Because that's like trying to convince a Patriots fan to become a Cleveland Browns fan like I am. And they would laugh. 1, because the Browns are so bad. And 2, the Patriots lie, as we all well know, right? In the last week, this was a little show. But they cheat, too. So we've been playing by the rules, and we still lost. But anyways, it's very hard to convince somebody when they have a mindset. It really is. Whether it's political or religious or social, people get ingrained into their culture, and they get a set of thoughts. That gives them a congruence. It gives them a sensibility of consistency. Well, a lot of times religiously, we get off that track, and we get caught up in, as Carlos said, why are people trying to come here to America? Because of the opportunities. The financial opportunities really is what drives people here. And when you have financial freedom, you have peace, at least in your mind, and for your family. You can provide things for them. But unfortunately, we have so much that we've abused that. We think that luxuries now are necessities. I know Brock's car, I don't like that car. It's all manual. I have to reach over and flick up the door thing every time. Then I got to flick that one up. I don't have an automatic thing for the trunk. And every time in my mind, I get, I'm thinking, I've gotten more used to it. But the first week, I was like, this is bad. Why have a car if you don't have electronics? But, you go back and I'm thinking, 15, 20 years ago, when I was in high school, man, we didn't even have air conditioning. You just had a car with 4 wheels that got you from point A to point B. Didn't have electronic ignition and all this fancy stuff that they have on cars today. So, you just get spoiled today. There's so much available to us that we really think that luxury is necessity. Well, in many parts of the world, you go into the countryside, not so much in the city. Most cities are fairly modern, maybe not up to the standards that we have, but most of them are either there or they're very close. And in Africa, we know many documentaries have been written and on the what they call the Lost Boys of Sudan. And of course, the civil war over there has just killed literally hundreds of thousands of people. And as the marauders would come into the village, obviously they would rape, pillage, and kill. And they were brutal. Well, those young men that couldn't fight for themselves for the village, they would flee. And they would have to go out into the desert, with literally nothing more than the shirt on their back. No food or small rationings that would last maybe a day or two. And as they fled, over 26,000 children between the ages of 5 and 15, orphaned and helpless, they made the epic and torturous journeys across the deserts of Sudan. In Paul's words, and that's what this story is about, he says, I left my village in 1987 when I was about 5 or 6 years of age. I had to flee to the nearest refugee camp and displaced person with my peers. As he goes on, he said, we had to face a lot of suffering, hunger, thirst, terrible heat in the desert. There was no hope for life, only death was inevitable. I left many of my friends with the vultures feasting on them. We walked all the way to Ethiopia. By then, we had no clothes, so we had to build fires, which accounts for my burns. Some got poisoned, others died of thirst, some were eaten by lions, and others animals. And you know, when you're reading this, you're thinking, yeah, this is first century read history. You know, but in essence, this is a modern day story that actually is taking place today and had taken place in the past 20 years. But he says Ethiopian conflicts forced the children back into hopeless wanderings in Sudan. For 5 years later, the group of boys entered Kenya, where they crowded with countless others in the refugee camps. Only half of the boys' original number have survived the horrific ordeal. Paul spent 10 years subsisting in a refugee camp where he turned towards the God. Now here's where it gets good. And this shows you how God works providentially. We don't always understand at the moment how God is working, but you can always look back in the past and say, hey, I see the footprints of God. I see the hand of God in how He worked, how He brought Paul into Macedonia for one soul. He brought him over into that part of the country. Well, for this one individual, Paul, as he was in this camp and lived there for this long period of time, his friend brought a tattered newspaper with a small advertisement, study the Bible for free with World Bible School. Free sounded great to a refugee. The world expanded his vision. Bible addressed his deepest needs, and Paul enrolled and diligently worked his way through the courses, yearning for God's eternal hope. Paul gave his life to Christ in faith and baptism. Now he reports several churches exist in this camp because of World Bible School. In 2003, 3,600 of these young men got to come over to the United States. Eventually, he entered David Lipscomb and majored in Bible and administration. And of course, he went back and is going back to southern Sudan, which obviously he wants to help to understand about God. That to me is an amazing story. Well, let me tell you about another amazing story. A story here that I just find unbelievable. Unbelievable, but yet true. Because if you really have a heart for God, and you really believe in the sacrifice that is involved in what Christianity is all about, then I think you can begin to see the spirit that Paul had. Because Paul said in Philippians 4 that all things he considered lost for the glory of God. He looked at the world as rubbish. He looked at the things that are around us as temporary. He longed to be with God in heaven. And he was willing to sacrifice, the Apostle Paul that is, everything for the cause of Christ. When we read about that, we admire that. We have books upon it. We have study groups, and we talk about the Apostle Paul and the great love that he had for God. But for a lot of us, we have a hard time relating to that because within our culture and our world, things are so much different. And we're not dealing with this constant death and life conflict. We're not dealing with life and death through starvation or through, obviously, persecution. But one such young man, Doka, is really an inspiration. It says that his particular name, and I'm not very good at pronunciating, but I'll try my best, but his name is Obadiah Bakinku Doka. And since you don't know the spelling, I did it correct, or close to it. But anyway, it says that he grew up as the son of the head of a witchcraft association in Kifa, northern Nigeria, where Muslims dominate. They advocate Sharia, that is the imposition of strict and harsh Muslim law. Spiritism and occult deepens the spiritual darkness. Many Christians have been killed there. From the earliest days, Doka was warned against Christianity. It was called the white man's religion. spread by criminals and liars. Doka became a Muslim and worshipped the family idols with his father. But in 1984, something very unusual happened. And here's how you see the hand of God. It says there that he saw a fellow school student running away from something. That something was a young man called Bertrus, a student convulsing from seizure. Doka asked, "What's wrong?" They replied, "He's sick, and if you touch him, you will get sick and die." But Doka took pity and helped this young man get treatment. About a week later, Doka visited his home, and Doka noticed a piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "Shh. Doka, don't speak of this. This is a World Bible School course from the U.S." This young man feared punishment from his family if the course was discovered, yet he gave the paper to Doka, who also enrolled in World Bible School with his teacher, Charles White of Ozark, Missouri. Now that's somewhere in the United States. I don't know where Missouri is.
Nowhere.
Carlos does. But in this, it says there that Doka learned well from Charles. When Doka asked for a Bible, World Bible School sent one, first package ever, to this particular individual. The postmaster, however, saw Doka unwrap his Bible. The postmaster took the Bible, poured kerosene on it, and burned it to save the boy from serious trouble. Nevertheless, Doka studied World Bible School lessons and was soon ready to become a Christian. Charles White contacted Nigerian Christians to go to Doka's home and baptize him. No one was willing. And that just reminds me, you think back, as Paul became a Christian, no one was willing to go into Paul because of his murderous intentions. We know it's his stoning of Stephen and his intentions as he headed to Damascus. But God intervened against Paul. Now, Paul thought he was doing correctly. He had a conscience that he was doing God's will, but he obviously was not. God had to use special means to get him to see the truth. Well, you can see how God is going to use these special means here with this young man. Because in my mind, he embodies that same spirit that the Apostle Paul had. And of course, considering his environment, considering where he's come from and what he has to deal with, this is a better situation for him, even if it means death. And I think of so much about our commitment today in the church. And these individuals are willing to give their lives. There's missionaries willing to give their lives. We're not willing to give another hour to the church sometimes. We're not willing to give up a particular event in our lives so that we could be more committed to God and spread the gospel. That's why we're not multiplying. That's why we're not growing. Because we're not carrying out what God has asked us to. But nevertheless, it says here that Doka studied the World Bible School lessons, was soon ready to become a Christian, and of course no one would come. But then they told Charles about this young man, and that he would be killed if he left Kippa. Charles communicated the problem to Doka, but Doka was determined. Finally, he traveled 5 hours to Eatman's house and received baptism in the Christ. When he returned home to Kippa, Doka could tell no one was excited about his secret. Eventually, he escaped each morning's idolatrous worship by going early to drive birds and animals from the crops. At last, Doka told one of his brothers the truth of the conversion. Doka's father found out and furiously asked, "Where did you hear about this Christianity?" He drew a line in the dirt. "Here's where your body will lie," he warned. "If you do not abandon Christianity, choose between this religion and your life." Doka was outcast, no longer considered a family member. His father tried to take from Doka the family name, tried to have his wife Naomi taken back by her parents, yet Doka still refused to recant his faith. When you read this determination and this commitment, this is something that means something to him. And that's what Paul's talking about. If Christianity is a treasure, if it's an eternal gift from God, it's something that we need to protect with our lives. And yet, sometimes we easily compromise. We easily go back and forth between the world and Christ. But this young man, he was determined. He was determined the fact that he knew he was doing correctly. He was committed to God, and God was going to use him for this great cause. Not only that, he's not listening to the naysayers, which were saying, "You're going to die," even by his very father. That had to be, this is a situation in this world where it's very difficult to survive there without your family. without support. To be the only individual takes an incredible spirit. But it says here that the situation reached a climax when Bilhah's half-sister Mary asked him to escort her on an errand. At an intersection is arranged by family members, a large fish truck waited to run down the Christian and kill him. What are family members for? Right? The truck hit Bilhah, knocked him over a pile of construction sand. Mary, however, was killed under the truck's wheel. In the confusion, bystanders believed Bilhah was also dead. The family was drinking and celebrating, but Bilhah reappeared, much to their disappointment. Christians in safer regions heard of Bilhah's injury, sent for him. Clarence Wilson, a veteran worker in Nigeria, cared for Bilhah until he recovered. Soon after, Bilhah completed a course in the Bible training. After much prayer and discussion, he decided to return to Kefa to preach and teach. Many of his friends considered this a fatal mistake. But Bilhah returned. At first, only, very slowly, perhaps just him and his wife. Eventually, 250 became Christians in this particular village. Also, sadly, many disappeared. Some were killed, their bodies discovered. Some probably ran away to escape persecution. A church of about 60 took root in Kefa and still grows. A friend asked Bilhah's father, "You have said this boy will die, but he is not dead." Bilhah's father answered, "He has a strong spirit behind him." When Bilhah heard this, he remembered 1 John chapter 4, verse 4. He who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. You know, you've read that, you probably heard that preached many years, but think about that. Now it means something real, because it means a matter of life and death. God is willing to put us in harm's way, only that we not be killed, but that we can spread His word more. And this young man was determined to continue his quest. In 2000, he received a degree from Freed-Hardeman University. He has returned to Nigeria, and after a time, with the church in Kefa, Bilhah and Naomi and their children moved to the nearby capital city, Abidjan, with its wider opportunities. They established a school, nursery through junior high. In addition, their free literacy program has 12 centers in 3 states and has earned special recognition. Many lives are being uplifted, and many souls are rejoicing in the good news that is worth the price of life itself. You know, for a lot of us, this is merely a story, because we haven't experienced what goes on. We only read about it, we only hear news clippings about it, or I get emails about individuals in different parts of the world who are put in prison, literally hard labor, for reading their Bible. I mean, we're not even talking about creating a riot. We're not even talking about creating a situation that would warrant such severe punishment. We're talking about those that merely open the Word of God. And here's the thing. We have such an opportunity here. In America, we have a free society. The government has allowed us to continue to preach the gospel. Satan hasn't gotten a foothold yet in our Supreme Court or in our higher courts, but he's working on it. Little by little, he's working on trying to take away our rights. And in many parts of the world today, they do not have the freedom that we have. It is a matter of life and death. And as we look at ourselves in the church today, and we look at young men like Paul and Bilhah, and the fantastic spirit that they had, Christ to them is worth dying for. And Paul said he was willing to die for the cause of Christ, because he saw what the world is, and he saw what Christ offers. And if we turn our backs on that offer, that's a great mistake. If we don't obey that salvation, that's even a graver mistake. Yeah, the difficulties are there. Paul even said in Timothy, scarcely will even the righteous enter the kingdom of God. It's difficult. It really is. It's hard, it's mentally, emotionally difficult, spiritually difficult to remain faithful and to keep our eyes on Christ, because Satan is going to throw everything he has at us. But if we take the spirit that these young men had, see how God multiplied what they so sacrificed for, not because of themselves, but because they realized what God had done for them. That's what Paul's talking about when he talks about a precious gift, a treasure that we have emboldened unto us. And we are stewards of that treasure. we have an opportunity to protect it. Sometimes we compromise. Sometimes we run like a dog with the tail between our legs. Sometimes we give in and we won't take a stand. Think about these two young men next time you want to take a stand. They're willing to give their lives for Christ, and because of that, many died, but many live, and now are bearing fruit for the kingdom of God. If you have any desire, any need at this time to come forward, we're going to give you that opportunity. If you want to be baptized or recommit yourself unto God, why don't you come right now as we stand and as we sing.
Just as I